To be 3-5 right now is pretty much, what everybody expected, being 2 games under 500 here. But the way the Phillies have played, the fight that they've shown, I think that's been a bit of a downright shock. I mean, the way that they've scored runs late in games, tack on runs. We saw 2 of those last night. And the way that they've, they performed above expectations against Max Scherzer last Sunday. Scored just 1 run, but chased him after 6 innings. Last night against Matt Harvey, chased Utley with the homer, Cody Ashley with the homer, and chased him after 6 innings. So the Phillies have faced a string of really good starting pitchers here, and to be 2-3 through those 5 grueling games so far, I think that's a bit above expectation.
Corey, I want to get into a little bit about Chase Utley. A lot of conversation over the last week. He's got off to the slowest start of his career. Yesterday, going into the game, 2 for 22. Just didn't look like the same player. Then, bam, 3 for 3 last night. Hits a home run, and everybody thinks that Chase Utley is back. Where do you kind of surmise that Chase Utley will fall this season?
Well, it's amazing what Citi Field can do to Chase Utley. I mean, those first 5 games, I had a stat that Chase Utley was off to the worst start of his career, and if you went to the previous 10 seasons, Utley in his first 5 starts of the season had hit .357 with 27 extra base hits in those games. So he usually starts off his seasons very hot. It was surprising to see him get off to such a cold spell, especially after homering 4 times in his final 16 plate appearances in spring training. You ask me where I think he's going to end up this season, I think he'll be somewhere around where he was last season. When he hit .270, he kind of faded after the hot start. The power sapped after May 31st. I think the intent with the Phillies this year is to give Chase Utley more time off. He played 155 games last year. I think they probably want to get that number closer to about 140, and also give him some time at first base later in the season to save his legs. But I could see Utley putting together a batting line of, say, .275 with a .340 on-base percentage, maybe 15 home runs, 70 RBI, something like that. But you got to realize that for a second baseman, that's still premium offensive production, and that still should make him a valuable commodity on the trade market.
Corey, the one interesting thing a lot of people discuss about why Howard gets hammered so much and Utley does not, a lot of people go to the $25 million Ryan Howard makes. Do you believe or suspect that people aren't quite aware what Utley's contract situation is, or do they not care? He's making $15 million over the next 3 seasons. I mean, that's a lot of money for a guy who's 36 and, maybe slowing down a little bit. Do you think people just don't care or don't know as much about his contract situation?
That's a really good point. That's a very good point. I haven't really heard anybody mention that before, but now that I think about it, people get caught up in a total number. So Ryan Howard's total number was $125 million. Chase Utley's total number at the time he signed that contract was $28 million, because his deal was 2 years, $28 million, with 3 ensuing options that vest with a certain amount of plate appearances, and each of those options is between $14 and $15 million. So really, the total value of that contract can reach as high as $70 million. I don't think people realize how much Chase Utley's making just because the reported number when it first came out was $28 million. But, yeah, I mean, we talk about that all the time in the CSN Philly newsroom about how Chase Utley kind of tends to get a free pass from the fans, whereas Ryan Howard is booed with every strikeout. But I think much of that is just due to the fact that Chase Utley, when he's struggling, it's not as pronounced as when Ryan Howard's struggling. Last weekend, in the Sunday game against the Nationals, Howard was 0 for 4 with 4 inning-ending strikeouts, and all of those at-bats came with men on base. So those kinds of things stand out. Utley's struggles kind of fly a little bit more under the radar.
That's a good point, Corey. I said last week, Howard hit 2 doubles in a game the Phillies won, and then the next day he strikes out 4 times, and everybody remembers that. They boo him unmercifully, but he hit 2 doubles and helped them win a game. Utley goes 3 for 3 last night, hits a home run, and obviously people are cheering him in a game they lost. So it seems like the 2 guys are certainly not put on the same scale. Now, one's a first baseman, a bigger guy. He's not going to have the same grace and hustle appearance that Utley does. But how much do you think that plays into it, too, with Utley, that he's just revered because he, looks like he's hustling and always gritty and giving it his all?
No, I think that definitely plays a role in it. Chase Utley has always been that guy. I mean, he's always been the guy who is probably a better base runner than he is fast. A guy who's always used his his heart more than his talent. I mean, he's a very talented guy, don't get me wrong, but Chase Utley looks like he's always going 100 miles per hour. And as Phillies fans tend to gravitate toward that more so than a guy who's just out there, belting home runs. But what I want to say about Ryan Howard is that it's kind of a shame where this has gone, because Ryan Howard, like, everybody forgets about the 4 unbelievable record-setting years he had early in his career. And I know that eventually, after Ryan Howard retires, when he comes back and he's inducted into the Phillies Wall of Fame, and if he's honored as an alumnus, that he will be cheered. But for a long time before that, people are only going to remember how precipitous this decline was. And that's really a shame for a guy who guided this team to the best era in franchise history. But, that kind of falls on management for that contract and keeping him around so long.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. You just mentioned it, and I get people who think that I protect Howard a little bit too much. But look, I, like you, guy hit 58 homers, drove in 149, top 5 MVP for 4 years. I think he meant a lot to this franchise and is not appreciated for that. I understand his drop was pretty far, but the Phillies signed him to a big deal, and he, is not living up to that. As much as I'm not an Amaro guy, do you think that he tried to get Howard signed before Pujols, Teixeira, and Fielder were coming to kind of set the market? Those guys' contracts are way worse than what Howard's getting. The Phillies got off easy by not having to give Howard the deals that those guys got.
Yeah, they definitely did. And each of those teams that handed Teixeira, Fielder, and Pujols those contracts would probably like them back. All of those contracts have played out kind of disastrously so far. The Phillies got Ryan Howard for $50 million cheaper than any of those guys went. And Adrian Gonzalez can be thrown at that too. I believe he got $160 million. And Joey Votto also made over $200 million. So the first base contract really got out of control there for a couple of years. I saw Shane Victorino when he was here for the opening series. He mentioned something about how when Ryan Howard was having all those historic seasons, he was making the league minimum or close to it. So it's almost like the Phillies paid him for the past production, which is something you never want to do as an organization. But I guess there's a lot of sentimentality that went into it during that period where the Phillies were keeping their veterans around. And, yeah, that contract looks ugly right now, and it's absolutely unmovable, but it's not Ryan Howard's fault that he got paid that money.
No, it's not. And, here's a guy who used to hit 50 and 40 home runs. He's now in the, mid-20 range. You look at Utley, here's a guy who used to hit in the 30 home run range. He's now in the teens. So both of them have dropped by half. What is that, age? What do you surmise that those guys have literally dropped in half? Is that just baseball? And maybe a lot of people don't want to speculate on those two particular players, but they've both dropped half their production in, about a 5 to 6 year span.
This is the way that players age. I think it got masked by the steroid era when guys would be hitting 35 homers when they were 37 years old. But this is the way players always historically aged and the way they're going to age in the future. So half of it is it being just baseball, and the other half is the injuries. There's a clear line of demarcation with Ryan Howard. After the Achilles injury, his production just completely fell off. Even before that, he was serviceable as a guy hitting 255 with 33 and 116, numbers like that. And obviously since 2012, it just hasn't even been close to that. With Chase Utley, all the chronic knee issues. The fact that he's been able to be on the field for the last couple of seasons now is impressive in its own right. But, when you look at the numbers these guys used to put up, Chase Utley hitting 330, getting on base at a better than 400 on-base percentage clip, those were incredible numbers. Chase Utley had one of the most impressive 5-year peaks of any second baseman in the history of baseball. And if he had that going for a little bit longer, we'd be talking Hall of Fame for Chase Utley. Of course, it didn't last as long. But, no, most of it is just the fact that they've aged, and you can't expect that kind of production as a guy gets into his mid and later 30s.
Yeah, and you just mentioned something that always kind of strikes my nerve, especially when we talk about this team. You mentioned Utley, that him and Howard, both their prime years kind of got cut off because they didn't get up here till so late. They didn't really start until they were 26 years old, and that kind of, they got some of their prime taken away from them, so their production was a much shorter window than most, and that's a problem that this team has now, that they don't have a lot of young players, but they've typically, even when they had young players, Corey, did not want to kind of turn to them.
Yeah, that was the Phillies' way for a long time, was to keep those guys on the farm developing until they kind of hit their mid-20s. It's good to see that the last few years they've gotten away from that. Cody Ashley was either 22 or 23 when he first came up. Maikel Franco in his early 20s when he first came up. The fact that they've infused some young guys like David Buchanan and the like. But, that does frustrate a lot of Phillies fans that I hear from all the time, that they're not bringing up these young pitchers or the young position players that pop up every once in a while. There are far fewer young position players than there are pitchers, but at this point, there's really nobody on the farm that stands out as a guy who needs to be up right now. Maikel Franco does not have the confidence or the stats that would back up a promotion right now, plus Cody Ashley is hitting. All those young pitchers at Double-A, the Ben Lively's, and the Tom Windle, and Zach Eflin, Aaron Nola, Jesse Biddle, those are all guys that the Phillies don't feel are ready just yet and want to kind of delay the service clock on them just a bit. Roman Quinn, the center fielder, might be the leadoff man of the future, but there's not a spot for him right now. So if you go across the board on this, in the minor league system right now, there's nobody who's jumping out that needs to be up here. There's not a Ryan Howard knocking on the door as he was in the early 2000s. But I completely agree that those guys, if they would have come up at 22, 23 years old, the Phillies would have been better earlier, and those guys would have much more impressive career stats.
Corey Seidman, CSN Philly, with us covering the Phillies tonight. Is this the beginning, the start of seeing a platoon at first base, do you think?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think there's a couple things at play here. One is that Ryan Howard, in my opinion, should be moved out of the cleanup spot very soon. I don't understand the fascination with batting him fourth. I get that you want to have him in the lineup against a right-handed pitcher, but he can bat sixth. I mean, we see that all across baseball. Alex Rodriguez batted seventh and eighth for the Yankees when he started declining himself. So, nobody is immune to moving down in the batting order. But the Phillies have Darren Ruff in against Gio Gonzalez. I believe Darren Ruff also started last Friday night when the Phillies faced Gio Gonzalez, the lefty. So this does look like it's at the beginning of a platoon situation, which is going to be a very good thing because Ryan Howard does not hit lefties, notoriously, and Darren Ruff just gives him an opportunity to get some more playing time, both in the corner outfield and at first base.
And by the way, the lineup tonight does not have Howard in the lineup, as Corey just said. Ruff will play first base. That was what I was referring to there. But Utley is in the lineup. He is batting third as a left-hander. He's struggling. The Phillies lineup, a couple of years ago, they were very left-handed heavy, and a lot of people talked about that. Hasn't been brought up as much this year, I guess, without the interest in the team. But another lineup, another roster that is very heavy left-handed that they've put together here. You wonder if they're looking to try to just move somebody even in a minor way just to kind of break that up, because this is a very left-handed team again.
Especially when Dominic Brown returns. When Dominic Brown returns, you're going to assume that he's going to be playing every day in right field. So that's going to be a situation where you have all three of your outfielders. If it's Revere, Herrera, and Brown, all of them hit from the left side. And then you have 3/4 of your infield hitting from the left side. And really, the only two guys who would be batting from the right side would be Carlos Ruiz and Freddie Galvis because he's a switch hitter. But, yeah, it's a very left-handed hitting team. That's why the Phillies wanted to keep Jeff Francoeur. It's why the Phillies wanted to keep Darren Ruff and have those guys on the opening day roster. And that's why they've gotten so much playing time early in this season.
Corey Seidman's with us here on CSN, from CSN Philly, here on 97.3 ESPN. Corey, the pitching staff has held up its end of the bargain for the most part. Hamels pitched pretty well. Harang has been outstanding. Williams pitched pretty well in his start. And, of course, O'Sullivan was serviceable. Buchanan struggled a little bit there. But is the starting pitching giving you some hope, especially Harang, that maybe they can move some of these pieces?
Yeah, and that's a great point. The fact that they can move some of these pieces. I don't see why the Phillies couldn't get more value for Aaron Harang midseason than they did for Roberto Hernandez midseason last year. Aaron Harang has been great. I mean, it's been very easy and mechanically sound, and his delivery's been great, and the command has been spot on. And you got to say the same about Jerome Williams too. Jerome Williams, a guy who has had a very unlikely career resurgence here. In 10 starts as a Philly, since joining them last August, he has a 2.70 ERA, a whip just above 1.10, and he's allowed 2 runs or fewer in 7 of those 10 starts. So the Phillies, their starting staff has gotten off to a pretty good beginning to the season with 5 quality starts in 8 games. David Buchanan has had 2 clunkers, and Cole Hamels obviously not sharp on opening day. But aside from that, they have kept the Phillies in every single game. We've seen Sean O'Sullivan match Max Scherzer. We've seen Aaron Harang match Jacob deGrom. So early in the season, I think the starting pitching returns have been above expectations. It's just that this offense hasn't provided them the run support they need.
No, it hasn't, and I don't know that any of us anticipate that it will during the course of the season, which means a lot more stress on the pitching, and then, of course, the bullpen. The bullpen was supposed to be a strength. Have they been where you thought they'd be?
Not quite. Ken Giles has been up and down. I mean, he's looked better in his last 2 outings, but the fastball is still not reaching above 96 miles per hour the way that we saw it, like sitting consistently in that 98, 99 range last year. Jake Diekman, had the misfortune on opening day of being used against 5 right-handed batters. I feel like that falls more on Ryan Sandberg's usage of Diekman than it does on Diekman himself. But eventually I think this bullpen can still be very good. With Beekman, with Giles, Jonathan Papelbon, despite all of his outlandish comments, is still a productive closer. And then you have Luis Garcia, a kind of under-the-radar reliever who has finally seemed to figure things out. He has a scoreless streak of 10 2/3 innings that dates back to last season, and his opponents were 3 for 34 over that span. He's a guy who looked like a 4A player for a while. He would dominate AAA and then be all over the place in the majors. He looks like another guy who's adding depth to that bullpen.
Corey, what do you think of the job that Sandberg's done so far?
He doesn't have a complete, arsenal to use. He doesn't have a complete roster, but he's had shaky management of the bullpen and the starting staff. He seems to leave his starters in a bit too long, although early in this season his leash has been shorter. But the usage of the bullpen, the constant usage of Jake Diekman against right-handed batters continues to baffle me. He's your one guy out of the pen who should be the lefty specialist when you have two lefties due up in a row or one tough situation coming up. And yet if you look at last year, he faced 213 righties compared to 100 lefties. And early in this season, it's been 13 righties and 2 lefties. So I'm not sold on Ryan Sandberg's bullpen management or the management of the starting pitching staff, but it'll be easier to make that determination as the year goes on. You can't judge him on wins and losses, but you can judge him on in-game strategy. Absolutely.
And last night's a night where they blew through the lefty early, and then the 8th they had no lefty left, and obviously that. And, a couple things I don't know what you thought about suicide squeezing with the pitcher on third base last night. I thought was, a little out of the ordinary. But, hey, if you're trying to surprise teams by scoring any way you can, fine. But typically your pitcher's not the best base runner in the world.
Yeah, I agree. And it's strange because the Phillies keep calling themselves a small ball team. Well, they're a small ball team that's having a ton of trouble getting bunts down. Freddie Gallis has, failed to execute a couple different bunts. The starting pitchers continue to fail in sacrifice situations, and that was a problem last year too. So you would think a team that is so reliant on stringing together hits and singles because it doesn't have much power, you'd think it would be more fundamentally sound, but it hasn't looked so early in the season.
Not to mention in the 9th last night, you got Revere up, you got a catcher playing third base. Might have been a good time to try to get yourself on base somehow like that. Maybe that's something that's not as much on the manager, but maybe on the hitter up there realizing that, hey, they got a catcher playing third.
Yeah, this they're going to need to do literally every single thing they can to score runs because, when you look across this lineup, there's nobody that strikes fear into a pitcher anymore. Maybe Chase Utley because he's hot right now, maybe Cody Ashley because he's hot right now, but by and large, this team is going to be throwing a ton of fastballs, and it's going to be up to them to hit those fastballs and force pitchers to kind of try to nibble on the corners a little bit. That's why you're not going to see a lot of homers. That's why you're not going to see a lot of walks from the Phillies team. So you got to be creative to score runs.
Corey, anything or any thoughts on Hamels in that situation, or is this going to kind of be silent until about early July?
Yeah, I think that market is going to heat up as June rolls around. Maybe you could see something, maybe talks heat up in early June going into July as teams really get set for the stretch run and consider themselves either contenders or pretenders. I think that Cole Hamels' trade value is only going to increase as the season goes on because of the second wild card, keeping so many borderline clubs in the race. For example, the Rockies. The Rockies have a tendency to fade away every year, and they always need pitching. Well, what if this year Tulo and Cargo stay healthy, and the Rockies are in it in mid-June? Did they make a run at Hamels? The fact that Hamels is cost-controlled, the fact that he's going to make just $96 million over the next 4 seasons, that makes him attractive to any club in baseball because he's an ace who right now is making below market price as far as ace goes, and as an ace goes. So that would keep a team like the Pirates maybe in it, or the Royals maybe in it. So things not hot on the Cole Hamels front right now, but I would expect him to heat up as the summer rolls around.
All right, Phillies tonight looking to avoid the sweep against the Mets, and it'll be, of course, Jerome Williams against Jonathan Neese. 3-game set against the Mets ends tonight at Citi Field. Corey Seidman, CSN Philly, with a look at the Phillies in their first week of the season. Corey, it's always a pleasure, pal.
Same here.